Saunderson. I'm the organiser for London Haunts and Horrors, and thank you for coming tonight. It's going to be a terrific evening of paranormal discovery, if that's the word for it. As you're all aware, we have David Farrant here tonight, who is a legend in the world of paranormal, especially when it comes to some of the more outlandish or the more bizarre type of stories that we've heard over the last couple of decades, or even more decades, over the last 40 years. We're very fortunate for him to come tonight because he basically was at the centre of the Highgate Vampire media sensation. I think that's probably the only way you can say it, because that's why he's famous. David, back in 1969, 1970, was walking home one night. This is the story I hear. It may be different because lots of people say it's different stories. But he came home and he saw something through the gates, and it was a figure which he'll tell you about. Interested in it, he wrote a letter to the local paper saying, has anyone else seen it? And before you do it, on the front of every newspaper in the country, on the BBC, media sensation. Since that time, the legend has grown, and to the point where Highgate Vampire, fact or fiction, some people say it's a vampire, some people say it's nothing of the sort. We're going to find out what David thinks tonight, and he's going to give us an open and frank account of what is at Highgate Cemetery, whether it is a demon, whether it is a vampire, whether it is a spirit of some sort. He'll tell us what it is, and more importantly, you'll be able to ask him the question directly. Now, funny, or not funny, but that's not the right word. Fun, it's for fun, it's great that we've actually got some witnesses here who've seen the Highgate Vampire in recent years. And when I say Highgate Vampire, the thing that we call the Highgate Vampire is they saw it, and they're going to be here and we'll be able to ask them questions as well. So this is not like a one-off thing that happened one night coming home in 1970, 1969. This is something that's been there and has been worrying people, intriguing them, and having them talk, and lots of great controversy over the last 40 odd years. So what we'll do tonight is we're going to talk from David. He's going to talk for about 45 minutes. You'll get a chance to ask him questions, and then we'll have a little bit of a break, and then we'll bring on some of the witnesses and we'll continue on with them and ask them some questions about what happened. And then we'll have some fun along the way. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you put your hands together for Mr. David Farrant.
Right, excuse me. I better apologise at the beginning here. Let me tell you why. About 2 days ago, I cracked a rib, and it's quite painful. I fell over a table. It feels like a red-hot knife going in me. I'm only telling you all this because if you hear me going like this, that's the reason. I don't usually talk like that. And I just hope you could bear with me through the talk. Well, as you heard David explaining, no, I don't think I know what the details were. I have been in trouble with the police in the past for events which completely got out of hand. I don't really want to go into all those again. But let me just say one thing. I always say this at the beginning of a talk. I'm usually asked to talk about the bloody Highgate Vampire. That isn't an appropriate word, actually. It's not swearing. I don't believe in vampires. I never have done, and I never will do. I do accept the existence of psychic entities, but that is an entirely different matter. There are different categories of psychic entities, and I'm not going to go into them all here because we'll be here for hours and hours and hours. But basically, I think ghosts as such, certainly the biggest category, have no intelligence as such. What I mean by that, there is no outside entity that is trying to communicate with the person that witnesses them. I think that applies to the majority of ghostly sightings. They are really no more than transmissions, whether those are objects of human beings, albeit dressed in old-fashioned clothing sometimes, or whether it be poltergeistic activity. I don't want to go into poltergeists here too much, but I'll just say this very quickly. A lot of these cases, such as objects flying off shelves, doors opening and closing mysteriously, gas taps turning themselves on and off, could well be due not to outside entities, but unconscious forces, levels of consciousness within the human mind itself. The human mind is very, very, not so much funny, but it's a very deep thing. I'm going to come on to the Highgate Vampire in just a minute. But you know, sometimes I always put poltergeist into the second category. Sometimes these events, these entities, such as people being visited at night by certain figures, effects upon electrical systems is quite a common one. Light bulbs fading, light bulbs exploding, the television turning itself on and off. Maybe no more than due than to unconscious levels in that human mind itself. And all the time, this is important, they could be, in fact I believe they are, completely unknown to the people that are transmitting them. I say transmitting because the conscious mind, which most people usually use, that is the one we all think with, we eat with, we see each other with, cook our dinners with, we work with, we watch the television. Telling you the obvious, that is the normal everyday conscious mind. But it can also act as a barrier to stop other levels below it from coming to the surface. But when that conscious mind is at rest, is asleep, it can allow these other levels to come forward to the surface. And that is why a lot of these occurrences take place at night. When people are in a state of sleep, either light sleep or heavy sleep. There's a third category, very briefly. That is entities which are supposed to appear to people and convey some message. They may be trying to find something, they may have died under unhappy circumstances. So we mustn't just use that word ghost. I don't like that word at all, actually, because it conjures up visions of figures clanking chains in white sheets. It conjures up everything that I just don't agree with. Now, can I just tell you a very, very little, and I'll come on to the Highgate Vampire, and I'll use the word vampire in quotes. I was born in Highgate, in a large Victorian house, which incidentally was haunted. Not heavily haunted, but when I was very, very young, I used to see a figure sometimes appearing in the front room and disappearing through the wall, and I used to hear a distinct voice. I don't know how old it was, 5, 6, that seemed to be coming out of the wall. You could never understand what it was saying, but it was a definite, it was a male person. And my father was a very down-to-earth, materialistic man. He wasn't a bad man, I mean, he believed. No, sorry. He was a bit of an atheist, didn't really think that God as such was important. My mother was the complete opposite. She did. She believed in the powers of nature. She believed in spiritual progression. And indeed she used to attend 2 spiritualist churches, one in Kentish Town and one in Finchley. I don't know if it was still there or not. And I was brought up into that atmosphere. And when I told my father about these sightings, his attitude was, well, you just had a bad dream, you must have imagined it. And it didn't happen that often. I think maybe over 3 or 4 years I only saw it 3 or 4 times. But my mother was very understanding, and she used to explain to me that these things cannot hurt you. They're not trying to do you any harm, and you should try and understand them. And that's why it never really frightened me. And Highgate is a very old, actually, and elite, especially Highgate village area. But having said that, it's been well preserved. It hasn't changed much for centuries. Highgate Cemetery was opened in... That's what I told you about. Highgate Cemetery was opened in 1839. And obviously, a lot of the people at that time were buried in old Victorian crypts, in lead-lined coffins. Later on in the years, well, I'm going back to the late 60s, 1970s, due to a spate of early Hammer horror movies, which they used to film on location in Highgate Cemetery. I remember one was called Taste the Blood of Dracula. Dracula AD 1972, The Body Beneath 1969, and quite a few others. I can't even remember the titles. But because of that, basically, and because of the fact there had been an unexplained phenomenon that had been cited in Highgate Cemetery by various local witnesses and at different locations around Highgate Cemetery, and by completely independent people, this got mixed up with stories of vampirism. Obviously influenced by these genuine Hammer horror movies that were being filmed in Highgate Cemetery, this ghost got the reputation of being a real, live, blood-sucking vampire. And of course, that's all nonsense. I say it's nonsense because I do not accept it's possible. Once consciousness has left the body, I'm talking about the physical body, we don't know where it goes. That's a completely different question. I'm not going to try and speculate on that here. It can't return to a physical body. It's rather like a snake shedding its skin. It's finished, the skin is dead. It can't return and re-inhabit that skin. That's why I've so categorically said over the years, when people sometimes don't want to understand me or just can't, there is no such thing as physical vampires, except where these exist in Hammer horror movies. As I said, there is a definite entity there which I believe has remained earthbound. In psychic terms, that means it's bound to the earth, maybe for quite a number of reasons. A building could have, excuse me, a building could have been disturbed, and psychic energy has got a habit, it's not really a habit, it makes it sound like it's alive, but put it like this, old buildings, especially made of stone, can actually harbour psychic energy. That can be released, and it can be viewed, if you like, as a ghost. And that's how it's reported. I believe that is the case with the entity that was sighted at Highgate Cemetery. It began in earnest in the late 1960s. It went on through the 1970s. I actually witnessed something myself back in '69. went to Highgate Cemetery to try and find some logical explanation for what had been reported to me so often. I interviewed local witnesses and I took records down through the files of the BPOS, the British Psychic and Occult Society. And things accumulated. When I went to Highgate Cemetery, I was passing the top gate. And out the corner of my eye, it happened very quickly, I noticed a tall dark figure. It must have been nearly 7 or 8 feet tall. Well, in an event, it was almost as tall as the gate. I noticed it was not the bottom of it, but the upper part of it was highlighted against the sky. In the very distant background, there were houses, something there, you could make out without lights. It could have been, because Highgate Cemetery is quite high up, like it could have been looking at lights in the distance. But I'm absolutely sure this thing had 2 eyes. It had no discernible features. It had no discernible body, except it was a distinct black shape, even against the night sky. And my first reaction was that, oh, somebody's heard all these silly vampire rumours, dressed up in a cloak or trying to frighten the odd passerby as they pass the top gate of Highgate Cemetery. But it soon changed my mind, and please remember, all this happened so quickly. What could have been 5 or 6 seconds, literally sounded like 10 minutes. It felt like 10 minutes. And it's interesting because there have been many reports in later years of people having time lapses in Swains Lane. I have a person here who maybe wants to address you a bit later. Her name's Patsy, and she can tell you about that, almost as I hope she will tell you about a later sighting of this tall, dark figure. I wasn't present, this was in, I believe, 2005, but I'll let her confirm that. The area around, it was a bitterly cold night in December, and the area around myself had turned bitterly cold. If you can imagine, it's like putting your hand, opening the door of a refrigerator and putting your hand, well, it was in the freezer. It was a distinct drop in temperature. I realised, because I'd been involved in this mystical movement many, many years before this, that I was under a psychic attack. You don't have to be sensitive or intelligent to know when something's attacking you, because it felt like it was drawing me into some sort of vivid, hypnotic dream. In this order that I was involved with, as part of this, book spectres, we had to understand the Kabbalah, and there were several quotes used in the Kabbalah. They're only sigils, and I repeated one of these mentally, and the entity or whatever it was, it wasn't there. It was like you suddenly turned off the television picture. It was not there, and the temperature returned to normal. So, I reported back to the BPOS, said that I'd actually seen something myself, and the logical explanation I was actually looking for was I thought this must have been a wild animal, because you have foxes breeding had foxes, and you still have foxes breeding in Highgate Cemetery to this day. You have nocturnal hedgehogs scurrying through the undergrowth, and all these things could have contributed to it. I consulted with people, and eventually there were quite a few other local witnesses who reported similar figures. I can't go into them all, they're too long. One man was the accountant. He went into Highgate Cemetery one afternoon. It should be remembered the cemetery was open to the public then. Well, in the daytime anyway. He was an accountant, he lived near Highgate Village, and he's described to I went to visit him, a very similar entity to what I'd seen, tall, dark figure. He got lost in the cemetery. He'd left the main path Highgate Cemetery was very, very overgrown in those days, and if you got off the main paths, you could easily get lost. He heard the bell going to warn people to leave. He thought if he could make his way towards the bell, which was the main gate, well, he'd find his way out. And he was somewhere near the circle of Lebanon, but not in the circle, which is a sunken circle of tombs. It was somewhere above it, quite a flat piece of land. He just sensed something behind him. He turned around and he saw a tall, dark figure, but this time he was quite definitely, he told me, it had eyes, and he felt as if it was trying to hypnotise him. Now, being an accountant, this made me very interested, because, you know, accountants are usually dealing in mathematics, facts and figures. He didn't even believe in ghosts, and his only interest in Highgate Cemetery was in the architecture, he told me. He'd gone there to look around and this happened to him. So, I reported all these cases back to the BPOS. And then, not long after that, I was with and four other people, there were 5 of us, decided to visit Highgate Cemetery one night to try and find out what this entity was. And for this purpose, we took with us a psychic medium. The object of that would have been to try and make communication with the entity, the ghost, whatever it was, and try and find out its earthly purpose. Try and find out what it wanted, try and find out if it was the spectre of some person that had been buried in the cemetery. There's hundreds of things like that. We didn't know. The ceremony, for this purpose, we had implements with us because other people were involved in the society. Not many. The key one, which I better mention here, being a stake. It was a pointed stake, and we'd taken that to Highgate Cemetery, as we often do, not to Highgate Cemetery, but when we conduct communication ceremonies. The purpose of the stake had a sharpened point, and it was engraved with Kabbalistic symbols, was to drive this into the ground, and you could then cast a perfect, well, almost perfect, circle at any kind of circumference you wanted, whether it was a small circle of 3 feet, or it was a larger circle of 9 feet. All of a sudden, this took place as close as we could ascertain to where Thornton, that's the accountant's name, had seen the entity. And it was quite near the back wall, and we heard loud voices, we saw flashlights, and it didn't take too much intelligence to work out that it was the police. They were climbing over the back gates, and I was arrested. I was carrying a small tape recorder, I had a camera, I had a couple of candles, and the other people had other items too. And I had the stake and the piece of cord, which was attached to the stake. I was arrested and taken to Kentish Town Police Station. I wouldn't name the other people for one very good reason. Had I named the people, and I also gave the police a false name. I didn't give my address, because had I given my address at Highgate, the police would have gone straight to my flat. They'd have found all the records, they'd have kept me in custody, and found all the records of the BPOS, which had photographs and membership forms and people's details of where they worked. And those people had quite respectful jobs, and I wasn't going to give them to the police. So they kept me in custody overnight, and when that case came to court eventually, I was grounded, well, just before I go into that. When that case came to court, it was reported by some newspaper. It said David Farrant had no fixed address. Where was tried. And the police attributed a statement to myself which I did not make. While it is true they were speaking to me at the police station saying, "You don't believe all this rubbish about vampires, do you?" And I said, said, no, I'm a psychic investigator. We've been doing an investigation. They said, if I pleaded guilty, they'd let me, the case would be over in a matter of seconds, minutes, and it would avoid all publicity, which was what I wanted, because I was trying to protect my members. So I pleaded guilty to the charge on that understanding. The police officer stood up in court. He said that in recent months, years, Highgate Cemetery had been the target of serious vandalism. Now, serious, I'm not talking about knocking flower vases over or daubing paint. I'm not condoning that, but I'm just saying that's not what I mean. People actually going into Highgate Cemetery because of all these hammer horror movies being made there. Opening the lead-lined coffins, ripping the lead off the coffins and putting iron stakes through the corpses inside them. That was happening on a big scale. But having said that, it was nothing to do with myself or any of our members. The detective sergeant, well, I would admit I was talking to the police officer, I've just explained that to you in the Kentish Town Police Station. He explained that it was a psychic investigation, nothing to do with the vampires. When I came to court, the police officer in charge of the case stood up and proceeded to read a statement which he said I had said to him. It wasn't in my writing, it was in his own writing, he had written it down, and it wasn't signed. Sorry, I did warn you. And it went along the lines of to the fact that I had said to him, look, you wouldn't understand, I was hunting the king vampire of the undead. I intended to stake it, I intended to open coffins. When I found it, king vampire, I intended to stake it through the heart, now get this, and run away. What is that if it's not police language? John, that's you, isn't it? Oh, yeah, nice. Anyway, I didn't make that statement, so I pleaded guilty, so I immediately changed my plea to not guilty. And I gave the police my real name. I said, look, I'm David Farrant, and the case was adjourned. Now, that stake, as I said, was attached to a piece of white cord. I applied for bail just before I was released from prison. And I didn't attend the hearing, but it was reported in the press. The paragraph read was by Detective Sergeant Neville Brown. The paragraph read about the bail proceedings and said that Detective Sergeant Neville Brown produced a stake that was attached to a piece of rope. It wasn't attached to a piece of rope, it was a piece of white cord, I can only consider. But the reporter reporting the incidents must have been his glasses on. That was it. But when the case proper came to court, the stake was produced again, minus the cord. There was no cord on it. And I was supposed to have made this statement to the police, look, you wouldn't understand, I was going to stake the king vampire. Well, the magistrate, it came to court 3 times, and yes, and on one of the occasions, the magistrate's name was Christopher Lee. On the 3rd occasion, the case was, I fought the case, I said it was part of a serious psychic investigation. I said, in any event, it's just as akin for people to hunt vampires. I was being sarcastic. As it was for some organisations to spend vast sums of money trying to locate the Loch Ness Monster. The magistrate said he was quite, it worked against the police by not producing the tape recorder and the camera. The magistrate said he was quite satisfied that nobody could have possibly opened a coffin in the way the police were describing with a piece of wood. Because I had no implement, I had no crowbars on me. Anyway, that wasn't my intention. I was acquitted, and so what happened was this police statement, having already been relied in court, I believe it's called qualified privilege. It could be absolute privilege, I don't know. It's a long time since I had a libel case against a newspaper. As it had been read out in court, it gave the papers free licence to record it as it was given in evidence, which they did. And so I've become branded as a vampire hunter, which I'm not. I'm just a humble psychic investigator. We look at cases all over the country. But that's how the Highgate Cemetery case got out of hand. And I never have been a vampire hunter. Just a second. David, how are we doing for time? Because I don't know, I never wear a watch.
You're fine. If you want to keep talking, it's another 15 minutes if you like. So, but if you want to ask questions, answer questions.